The morning air in the capital was thick with the scent of diesel, polished leather, and the electric anticipation of thousands. It was the Day of the Brave, the largest military parade of the decade, and the city was a sea of flags. For most, it was a display of national pride. For me, it was supposed to be the day I finally reunited with Maya. My sister had always been a force of nature. When she left for the academy, she didn't just want to serve. She wanted to lead. Over the last 2 years, her letters had become increasingly sparse, replaced by news clippings of her rapid promotions and her involvement in the Iron Shield operations. She had become a poster girl for the modern military, stern, unbreakable, and elite. I, on the other hand, had vanished into a different world, one of shadows and high-level strategy that I couldn't discuss with anyone, not even her. I arrived at the parade grounds early, wearing a simple, nondescript charcoal jacket and jeans. I looked like any other face in the crowd, perhaps a bit tired, perhaps a bit out of place among the families wearing Army Mom t-shirts. I pushed through the dense layers of spectators, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had missed her graduation, her first medal ceremony, and her 25th birthday. I just wanted to see her eyes, to see if the sister I grew up with was still under that stiff, decorated collar. The drums began to roll, a rhythmic thunder that shook the pavement. Then came the rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch of combat boots on asphalt. The elite vanguard unit approached, led by a formation of officers on horseback, followed by the infantry. And there she was. Maya was marching at the flank of the lead column. She looked magnificent. Her spine was a steel rod, her chin tilted at a perfect angle, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun glinted off the silver bars on her shoulders. She looked like a statue carved from granite. "Maya!" I shouted, my voice cracking through the roar of the crowd. She didn't flinch. Her eyes remained locked forward. I moved closer to the velvet rope, dodging a frantic parent and ducking under the arm of a security guard. I was only 5 feet away now. The unit had halted for the ceremonial transition near the VIP grandstand. This was my chance. "Maya, it's me. Look at me." I called out again, reaching a hand over the barrier. For a split second, the statue cracked. Her head turned just a fraction. Her eyes, cold and sharp as glass, swept over the crowd and landed on me. I felt a surge of relief, a smile already forming on my face. I thought she would break protocol, maybe give a small nod, a wink, or at least a glimmer of recognition. Instead, her expression shifted into one of profound annoyance. It wasn't the look of a sister seeing a brother. It was the look of a high-ranking official looking at a nuisance. She signaled to a pair of military MPs standing nearby with a sharp, dismissive flick of her wrist. She didn't even speak to me. She spoke about me, her voice carrying that new, authoritative rasp she'd developed. "Sergeant, clear this perimeter," she commanded, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "We have a civilian causing a disturbance in the restricted zone. Move him back behind the secondary line immediately." The MPs moved instantly, their heavy hands landing on my shoulders. "Wait, Maya. It's Leo. I just got back from..." She stepped closer, not to hug me, but to exert the full pressure of her rank. Her face was inches from mine, but her soul was miles away. The scent of her perfume was gone, replaced by the smell of starch and gun oil. "Listen to me carefully," she hissed, her voice low so the crowd wouldn't hear, but her tone was venomous. "This is the most important day of my career. I am surrounded by the Joint Chiefs and the Ministry of Defense. I worked too hard to have a disheveled, wandering civilian claim some sort of connection to me in front of my superiors. You look like you just rolled out of a dive bar. Don't embarrass me. Don't ever call my name in public again." She turned her back on me before I could utter a single word about where I had actually been or why I was there. She didn't see the black government-issued encrypted phone in my pocket, nor did she notice the discreet earpiece tucked into my ear. "Move along, sir," the MP grunted, shoving me back into the mass of people. I stumbled back, the heat of humiliation rising in my chest. Around me, people were whispering. "Did you see that? He tried to pretend he knew Captain Vance." A woman laughed. Some people will do anything for attention. I stood there, swallowed by the crowd, watching the back of my sister's head as she marched toward the grandstand. She had spent so long climbing the mountain that she had forgotten who was waiting for her at the base. She thought she was protecting her reputation from a nobody. She had no idea that the civilian she just shoved into the dirt was the only reason she was receiving a commendation today. She had no idea that the very generals she was trying to impress were currently waiting for me to give the signal to begin the briefing. I straightened my jacket, wiped the dust from my sleeve, and felt a cold, calm resolve settle over me. Maya wanted to play by the rules of rank and power? Fine. I would play. I pulled the phone from my pocket and swiped the screen. A prompt appeared. ID verification required for Level 1 access. I pressed my thumb to the glass. "This is Director Leo Vance," I said into the hidden mic, my voice devoid of the warmth I had felt moments ago. "I'm heading to the North Gate for the security inspection. Tell the General the oversight consultant has arrived. And tell him I want the personnel files for the Elite Vanguard on my desk within the hour. Especially Captain Maya Vance." I took one last look at her, standing tall, proud, and completely oblivious, and then I turned my back on her, disappearing into the shadows of the VIP entrance. The sting of Maya's dismissal felt like a physical bruise, radiating from my chest to the back of my throat. As the MPs shoved me back, the crowd seemed to expand and contract like a living lung, pressing me further away from the polished boots and the brass bands. I stood on the edge of the sidewalk, a disheveled civilian, in the eyes of the woman who used to share her lunch with me under the old oak tree in our backyard. The humiliation was a bitter pill, but as I stood there, it began to dissolve into a cold, clinical observation. This was the environment she had chosen, a world where the fabric of a uniform mattered more than the blood in one's veins. I watched as she marched toward the massive concrete dais where the nation's most powerful figures sat under a canopy of silk banners. She took her place at the edge of the formation, standing like a sentinel, her eyes never once straying back to where she had discarded me. I moved away from the main thoroughfare, cutting through a narrow alleyway that led toward the restricted North Gate. My mind was a whirlwind of memories clashing with the present. I remembered Maya crying when she got her first acceptance letter to the academy. I remembered promising her I'd always have her back. I had kept that promise in ways she couldn't possibly imagine, using my intellect to secure the very borders she patrolled. But today, she had decided I wasn't worth the breath it took to say my name. The North Gate was guarded by a squad of special forces, men and women whose gear was a generation ahead of the standard infantry. They weren't looking for rowdy civilians. They were looking for threats. As I approached, 2 soldiers stepped forward, their rifles held in a low-ready position across their chests. "Restricted area, sir," one said, his voice muffled by a tactical mask. "The public viewing area is 2 blocks south." I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my charcoal jacket and pulled out a matte black wallet. I flipped it open. Inside wasn't a badge, but a high-density proximity card with a holographic strip that shifted colors as it caught the sun. The soldier's entire demeanor changed in a heartbeat. He leaned in, scanned the card with a handheld device, and watched as the screen flashed a deep, authoritative violet. The authorized chime was low, but in the sudden silence of the gate, it sounded like a church bell. "Director," the soldier stammered, his posture snapping into a rigid salute. "My apologies. We weren't told you'd be arriving on foot." "Spontaneous field assessment," I replied, my voice now carrying the clipped, icy precision of a man used to being obeyed. "Open the gate, and I want a secure line to the command center. Now." As the heavy steel gates hissed open, I stepped into the green zone, the nerve center of the parade security. Here, the festive atmosphere of the public was replaced by the hum of servers and the quiet murmurs of intelligence officers. I walked through the corridors of the temporary command post, ignoring the startled looks from junior staffers who wondered why a man in jeans was walking past 3 layers of biometric scanners. I reached the observation deck, a glass-walled room that overlooked the entire parade ground. From here, I could see the top of the VIP dais. I could see the back of the president's head, the glint of the general's medals, and, further down, the rigid, unmoving form of Captain Maya Vance. "Director Vance, you're late," a deep voice boomed. I turned to see General Holloway, the man in charge of the entire national defense grid. He was a mountain of a man, his face a map of scars and wisdom. He offered a hand, which I took with a firm grip. "I took a moment to observe the crowd's morale," I said, the lie tasting like ash, "and the conduct of our frontline officers." Holloway nodded, oblivious. "Excellent. They're a proud bunch today, especially the vanguard. They've been through hell in the desert. That young woman leading the third flank, Captain Vance, she's a rising star. Ferocious discipline. I'm thinking of moving her to the Strategic Planning Division under your department." I looked down at Maya. From this height, she looked small, like a lead soldier on a game board. She was currently standing at attention as a lower-ranking officer brought her a canteen of water. She took it without looking at him, her movements robotic and distant. She was so consumed by the image of the perfect officer that she had become a caricature of it. "She has the discipline," I said quietly, watching her. "But she lacks perspective. She's forgotten that the military serves the people, not the other way around. She sees the uniform, general, but she's stopped seeing the human beings underneath it." Holloway frowned, sensing the tension in my voice. "A common flaw in the young and ambitious. A few months under your tutelage would fix that." "Perhaps," I said. I pulled out my tablet and opened the live personnel feed. I tapped on Maya's file. Her face popped up, the official portrait, stern and unsmiling. I began to type notes into her permanent record, notes that would be read by every promotion board for the next 10 years. Below us, the ceremony was reaching its crescendo. The national anthem began to play, and a flight of stealth jets screamed overhead, their shadows momentarily plunging the parade ground into darkness. This was the moment of peak pride for Maya. She was standing in the inner circle, the elite of the elite, while the embarrassing brother she had discarded was, in her mind, probably still arguing with police officers 3 blocks away. I felt a strange mix of pity and cold anticipation. She had spent her life trying to climb a ladder, never realizing that I was the one holding the top of it. She wanted a world of hierarchy. I would give it to her. "General," I said, closing the tablet, "it's time for the final inspection. I believe it's tradition for the oversight consultant to personally verify the readiness of the lead officers on the dais." Holloway chuckled. "It's a tradition we haven't used in years, Leo. Usually, you guys just stay in the shadows and sign the checks." "Not today," I said, straightening my collar and checking my reflection in the glass. I looked like a ghost, pale, focused, and dangerous. Today, I want to see them up close. I want to see if their eyes hold up when they're looking at someone who actually has the power to take those silver bars away. "Very well," Holloway said, gesturing toward the door that led down to the main stage. "After you, Director." As I walked down the stairs, the sound of the crowd grew into a dull roar, but all I could hear was the rhythm of Maya's voice telling me to stay back. She wanted me out of her sight. In less than 5 minutes, I was going to be the only thing she could see. The atmosphere on the grandstand shifted with the suddenness of a mountain storm. One moment, the air was filled with the triumphant blare of trumpets and the self-congratulatory whispers of politicians. The next, a heavy, expectant silence rolled over the VIP dais. It started with the communications officers. I watched from the shadows of the tunnel entrance as their headsets crackled, their faces draining of color as they snapped to attention. Maya was standing less than 20 feet from the stairs, her back to me. She was the picture of military perfection. Shoulders squared, eyes front. Her hand resting with practiced ease on the hilt of her ceremonial saber. She was basking in the proximity of power, standing so close to the Secretary of Defense that she could hear the rustle of his papers. She thought she had successfully purged the nuisance of her civilian brother from her perfect day. She felt safe in her hierarchy. Then, the voice of the parade, a deep, resonant baritone that echoed through the stadium speakers, interrupted the scheduled music. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for a change in the order of precedence," the announcer intoned. The confusion was immediate. People looked at their programs. This wasn't listed. Joining us for the final review of excellence is the Chief Architect of the National Security Initiative and the Prime Consultant for the Ministry of Defense. I saw Maya's head tilt just a fraction. It was a breach of her statue-like discipline, a tiny crack. She knew that title. Everyone in the service knew that title. It belonged to the ghost of the ministry, the man who had redesigned the entire technological infrastructure of the armed forces. He was the man who decided which units were elite and which were redundant. To an officer like Maya, he was more than a man. He was the gatekeeper of her entire future. General Holloway stepped forward, his voice booming without the need for a microphone. "Officers, present arms." The sound was like a single, massive heartbeat, the rhythmic clatter of rifles and the ring of steel. Hundreds of soldiers, including Maya, transitioned into a state of total, rigid readiness. They were no longer just marching. They were being hunted by the gaze of a superior. "The consultant is a man who values results over rhetoric," Holloway announced to the rows of officers, his eyes grazing over Maya's unit. "He has been conducting a blind assessment of our conduct, our discipline, and our adherence to the core values of this institution, not just in the field, but how we represent the uniform in the presence of the citizens we serve." I saw the slight tremor in Maya's white-gloved hand. She was a master of the rules, but the core values part of Holloway's speech usually meant someone was about to be made an example of. She stood even taller, her chest puffed out, her chin high, trying to radiate a level of professional coldness that she thought would impress a man of high rank. She was doubling down on the very behavior that had led her to discard me an hour ago. "The director has arrived," Holloway whispered into the silence. I stepped out from the darkness of the tunnel. I didn't change my clothes. I was still wearing the same charcoal jacket, the same jeans, and the same boots that Maya had called disheveled. I wanted the contrast to be absolute. I wanted the visual to be a scar on her memory. As I walked onto the red carpet of the dais, the high-ranking officials began to stand. The Secretary of Defense turned and offered a respectful nod. The silence among the troops was so profound that you could hear the snapping of the flags in the wind. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing on the wooden planks. I didn't head for the center chair. Instead, I began a slow, deliberate walk down the line of the elite vanguard. I could see the sweat beading on the foreheads of seasoned colonels. I could feel the waves of anxiety rolling off the men and women in the front row. They saw a man who looked like a civilian, but they saw the way General Holloway, a four-star legend, was walking 3 paces behind me, acting as my shadow. Maya was at the end of the row. As I approached, she still couldn't see my face. She was staring straight ahead, her eyes fixed on a point in the far distance. But she could see my clothes from the corner of her eye. I saw her jaw tighten. I saw the flash of recognition of my silhouette. I could almost hear her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. She was likely thinking that I had somehow snuck onto the dais, that I was about to cause the very scene she feared. I saw her breath become shallow. She was terrified, not of me, but of the shame she thought I represented. She was still convinced that she was the giant and I was the insect. I stopped exactly 3 feet in front of her. The general stopped behind me. The entire world seemed to shrink down to the space between us. "General Holloway," I said. My voice projected just enough to be caught by the microphones. "This is the unit you spoke so highly of? The one that represents the human face of our military's future." "Yes, Director," Holloway replied, his voice formal. "Led by some of our most promising tactical officers." I turned my body fully toward Maya. I could see her eyes vibrating as she fought the urge to look at me. She was trapped in the position of attention, a prisoner of the very protocol she had used as a weapon against me at the gate. "Is that so?" I asked, my tone dripping with a quiet, dangerous curiosity. "Because I encountered this unit earlier today, and I found their understanding of service to be lacking. I found an officer who thought her rank gave her the right to treat the people she protects like dirt under her boot." Maya's face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. She knew the voice now. There was no mistaking it. The ghost of the ministry. The man who held her career in the palm of his hand was the brother she had just ordered to be thrown into the street. I leaned in closer until I was just inches from her ear, mirroring the way she had hissed at me earlier. "Look at me, Captain," I whispered. It wasn't a request. It was an order from the highest level of the chain of command. The air on the dais felt as thin as the atmosphere at 30,000 feet. For Maya, the world had become a blurred tunnel of panic. She was a woman who lived by the clock, the manual, and the chain of command, but the gears of her reality were suddenly grinding to a screeching halt. When I issued that whispered order, "Look at me, Captain," it wasn't just a brother speaking to a sister. It was the crushing weight of the entire Ministry of Defense bearing down on her shoulders. Slowly, with the agonizing mechanical precision of a soldier breaking the most sacred rule of the parade, Maya turned her head. The movement was jerky, her neck muscles taut like steel cables. When her eyes finally met mine, the impact was visible. It was as if she had been hit by a physical blow. Her pupils dilated until the blue of her irises was almost gone, swallowed by a void of pure, unadulterated shock. Her mouth didn't open, she was too well trained for that, but her jaw set in a way that signaled a total internal collapse. She looked at my face, then at the civilian jacket she had mocked, and then at the gold-flecked security lanyard now visible around my neck, which bore the crest of the Oversight Directorate. "Leo?" Her voice was a ghost of a sound, a tiny, fractured syllable that barely escaped her lips. It was the first time she had used my name in years without a tone of condescension, and it sounded wrong in the middle of a military formation. General Holloway stepped forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Captain, you are addressed by the director. You will maintain proper decorum." He turned to me, his voice softening with a touch of perplexity. "Director Vance, you know the captain?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to drown out the distant sound of the marching bands. I didn't look at Holloway. I kept my eyes locked on Maya. I wanted her to see every bit of the disappointment I felt. I wanted her to realize that the person she had treated as an obstacle was the only reason she was standing on this stage at all. "The captain and I have a history, General," I said. My voice projected clearly through the lapel mic, carrying across the VIP section and into the ears of the bewildered officers nearby. Though, according to her assessment an hour ago, I am merely a disturbing civilian who doesn't understand the importance of her career. A low murmur rippled through the rows of seated dignitaries. The Secretary of Defense leaned forward, whispering to an aide. Maya's face went from deathly pale to a deep, burning crimson. The humiliation was no longer mine. It had shifted across the 3-foot gap between us like an electrical current. I didn't realize," Maya stammered, her voice trembling. "Director, I was following protocol. The perimeter was. Protocol is a shield for the wise, Maya, and a cage for the foolish." I interrupted, my voice cold and flat. "You didn't see a security threat at the gate. You saw someone you considered beneath you. You saw someone you thought would tarnish the image you've spent so much time polishing. You were so busy looking at your own reflection in your medals that you forgot how to recognize your own blood." Holloway's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. He looked at me, then at the nameplate on Maya's uniform, Vance. The realization hit him like a freight train. He looked around at the other officers, his expression shifting from confusion to a stern, disappointed grimace. In the military, competence is king, but loyalty and character are the bedrock. To treat a civilian with such public disdain was bad. To do it to a family member who happened to be your superior's superior was a career-ending catastrophe. I stepped back, creating a distance that felt like a canyon. I looked at the line of officers, all of them standing in terrified silence. "This officer," I said, pointing a finger toward Maya without looking at her, "has been recommended for the Strategic Planning Division." She was cited for her unwavering focus and dedication to the mission. But today I witnessed a different mission. I witnessed a mission of ego. I turned to Holloway. "General, cancel the briefing for the Vanguard leadership. I think the captain needs some time to reflect on what it actually means to lead." A leader who turns their back on their own is a leader who will eventually turn their back on their country when the pressure gets too high. Maya looked like she was going to faint. The hand holding her ceremonial saber was shaking so violently that the scabbard clattered against her leg. This was the moment she had dreamed of, her standing on the dais, being recognized by the elite, and I had turned it into the scene of her professional execution. "Director," she whispered, a tear finally breaking through her mask and rolling down her cheek. "Please. You told me not to call your name in public, Captain," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "I'm simply returning the favor. From this moment on, you are not my sister. You are an officer under review. And believe me, my review will be thorough." I turned on my heel, the hem of my jacket fluttering as I walked toward the center of the dais to take the seat that had been reserved for me. As I sat down next to the Secretary of Defense, Holloway gave a sharp signal. "Vanguard! Dismissed!" he barked. Maya had to march off. She had to turn, salute the very man she had just insulted, and lead her unit away while the eyes of every general in the nation followed her with silent, judging stares. She marched with her head down, the granite statue finally broken into 1,000 pieces. I watched her go, a hollow feeling in my chest. I hadn't wanted this. I had wanted a hug. I had wanted a welcome home. But Maya had chosen the world of rank, and now she would have to learn exactly how much that rank was worth when you have no one left to stand beside you. The fluorescent lights of the high-security briefing room hummed with a clinical, unforgiving persistence. Outside, the sunset was painting the Capitol in shades of bruised purple and gold, but inside this soundproofed bunker, there was only the cold glow of monitors and the smell of ozone. I sat behind a desk carved from dark mahogany, my fingers laced together. On the desk lay two things: a glass of water and Maya's service file. The heavy steel door hissed open. Maya stepped in, the sound of her boots echoing like hammer blows against the polished floor. She wasn't wearing her ceremonial saber anymore. Her cap was tucked under her arm, and her hair, which had been a perfect coil during the parade, had a few stray strands hanging loose. She stopped exactly 6 feet from the desk and snapped a salute that was so rigid it looked painful. "Captain Vance reporting as ordered, Director," she said. Her voice was hollow, stripped of the arrogance that had defined it only hours ago. I didn't tell her to at ease. I let her stand there in the tension. I spent a long minute leafing through her file, the sound of the paper turning amplified by the silence of the room. "You've had a remarkable career, Maya," I said finally, not looking up. "Top of your class. Commendations for bravery under fire. A perfect record. On paper, you are exactly what this country asks for." I closed the folder and looked at her. Her eyes were bloodshot. She was fighting to keep her chin from trembling. "But paper doesn't bleed," I continued, my voice low. "And paper doesn't have a memory. Do you remember the last thing you said to me before I disappeared for 2 years? You told me I was wasting my potential because I wouldn't join the service. You told me that without a uniform, a man has no value. Leo, She started, her voice cracking. "Director," I corrected her sharply. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "Director, I didn't know it was you. If I had known." "That's the problem, isn't it?" I stood up and walked around the desk, my hands in my pockets. "If you had known I was your superior, you would have been the perfect sister. You would have smiled, you would have been proud, you would have played the part. But because you thought I was just a citizen, just a nobody in a charcoal jacket, you felt entitled to treat me like trash. You didn't fail me as a brother today, Maya. You failed the oath you took to protect the people. Because the people aren't just civilians. They are the reason you wear that suit." I stopped right in front of her. At this distance, the power dynamic was absolute. She was a captain. I was the man who oversaw the budget, the technology, and the strategic oversight of her entire world. "General Holloway wants to court-martial you for conduct unbecoming of an officer," I said. She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. "I understand. He thinks your dismissal of a high-ranking official, regardless of our relation, is a sign of psychological instability and elitist bias. He wants you stripped of your rank and reassigned to a border outpost in the tundra. The silence stretched. Maya looked like she was preparing for the end of her life. Her career was her identity. Without it, she was nothing. However, I said, turning back toward the window, I told him that would be too easy. Sending you away just makes you a martyr in your own mind. It doesn't fix the rot. I turned to face her again. I took a small silver insignia from my desk, the badge of the Oversight Training Division. I stepped forward and pinned it to her lapel, right next to her medals. It was a mark of under review status. You are staying in the capital, I told her. But you are no longer in the vanguard. You are being reassigned to my office as a junior liaison. Your job will be to handle the grievances of the families of fallen soldiers. You will sit in small rooms with mothers who have lost their sons and veterans who can't pay their rent. You will look into the eyes of civilians every single day until you remember what they feel like. Maya looked down at the badge, then back at me. There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Not just relief, but a deep, dawning realization of the penance I was demanding. You're making me your subordinate, she whispered. I'm making you a human being again, I replied. You'll report to me at 0600 every morning. You'll bring me my briefings, and you'll endure the whispers in the hall. People will know you're only here because your brother showed mercy, and that will be the hardest thing you've ever had to swallow. But if you survive it, you might actually become the leader the general thinks you are. I walked back to my chair and sat down, the shadow of the director once again masking the brother she used to know. Dismissed, Captain. And don't be late. I've already seen how you handle people who don't meet your standards. I suggest you start meeting mine. Maya stood for a moment, the weight of her new reality settling into her bones. She didn't salute this time with robotic perfection. She gave a small, hesitant nod, a gesture of genuine, humbled recognition. Thank you, Leo, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She turned and walked toward the door. As it slid shut behind her, I let out a long, shaky breath I didn't know I was holding. I picked up the glass of water, my hand trembling slightly. I had broken her world to save her soul. The parade was over. The lights of the city were bright, but the real work, the long, painful road of rebuilding a family and a character, was only just beginning.